So welcome to another video from theplayersaid.com. My name is Alexander, and today we're taking a look at Wilderness War. And this is part of our Faction Functions series, where we look at how each faction within a particular game functions. We'll talk about some of the ins and outs of kind of what to look at when playing a certain side, and some things to think about. This isn't a tutorial on how to play. It's not an exhaustive guide, especially with a game like Wilderness War that's almost impossible to put together because it's a card-driven game and there's so much unknown to it. But we'll go through some of the things to look at and what to kind of consider. So we're going to start with the French today, and we're going to deal a little hand of cards, and we're just more going to talk about how to assess what that kind of looks like. So we've got it set up as this is early season in 1755. If you're playing the full campaign, this is what it all looks like. 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Set those cards aside, and let's organize these. Lots of mixed bags. So for anyone brand new here, Wilderness War is a game where you're looking at either ops in the number or the event. You can only use the event if it is of your color. Blue for French, red for British. The blue both and red both is either side can do it. However, in this one, if you play the red events, you'll play the red cards as the French. Those are British events. The events do not go off for your opponent, nor is there any way for them to like really get those to trigger. So if you're French and you have a big red hand, you might not have a bunch of events, but you have a bunch of nasty British events that you're keeping from your opponent that they can't use. So don't be scared by a big red hand like that. So this is the French and Indian War. Starts in 1755. We'll look at the cards here in a second, but just kind of an overview of what we've got and what it is that we're trying to do to win. With the French, you're trying to have, at the end of the campaign, you're trying to have a positive amount of victory points. 1 or more victory points, and you're going to win the game no matter what. The British, same thing. If it gets to the end of the game and it's the VP marker is on the red side, that's what they're going to do. It is possible for, at the end of the game, it to be on 0 and it is a draw. That is possible, and I have played a game where that happened. It was our first ever game, and it was incredible. The French, on the other hand, do have some automatic victory conditions. If in 1760, so in this year, they have 8 victory points or more, they win automatically. If at the end of 1761 they have 5 or more, they win automatically. If at the end of 1762 they have 1 victory point or more, then they automatically win. So you don't need much to be able to do that. The other way to automatically win is to occupy every single fortress on the board. Fortress, 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 fortress. Effectively, that is impossible for the French. It's just not going to happen. You don't have the forces to be able to do that. But if you occupy all of those, and you occupy Niagara, and I believe Ohio Forks, then you, regardless of everything else on the board, you win. But I've never seen that done. That's incredibly rare. But that really what you're trying to do is just accrue and to keep victory points and to keep them positive. Well, how do you get victory points? Well, let's talk about that. On the play aid card, when the play aids in this one, whilst they might not look very inspiring, they're pretty good. So you're going to get 3 points for capturing an enemy fortress, and as the French, you will probably do a lot less of that. +2 to capture an enemy fort. This is a fort. It's got a little 1 in the middle. A fortress are printed on the map, and they're 2s. Capturing or destroying an enemy stockade. That is these guys here. Those are 1 point apiece. If you capture Niagara, you get an extra bonus point. If you capture Ohio Forks, an extra victory point. So Ohio Forks is this one, and Niagara is this one here. Those are just extra important. If you win a battle against regulars or any stack with more than 4 units, so regulars in this game are square units, or they're drilled troops, sorry. Those aren't regulars, those are provincials. Regulars are they're typically 3-4 units. So we got the British ones there, and I think we got the French one up here. So if you, regardless of how many, if you defeat them in battle, and defeating is just forcing them to retreat because you did more hits than them, or an equal number if you're defending, you get a point. So doing little battles and doing lots of skirmishes can make up for the fact that you might not be able to capture any fortresses. You get half a victory point per raid marker that you put up. That is rounded up. So if you put out 1 marker, you're going to get a point. If you put out 3 markers, you're going to get 2 points. And then you lose points if you commit a massacre, or if a massacre is played on you. You lose a point if you voluntarily demolish a fort or a stockade. And there's some optional rules as well. So, French and Indian War. This is a wildly asymmetric setup and game. What you can see on the board is that we've got a few regulars in Louisbourg, you got a big stack of regulars in Quebec, a bunch of irregulars, and there's a bunch of couriers and native troop, or native, like, Indian allies, and then a couple bits and pieces, a little stack of irregulars over here, mixed bag there as well. So you don't have a whole ton. There's a couple leaders that you will get in the course of the game, and you have, I think, 2 French regular reinforcements that will put 3 regulars each onto the board. You do not have a lot of forces. Most of your stuff already starts on the board. The British, however, have this big old stack in Albany, which is mostly provincial troops. They're not as good, but they're slightly more prevalent, depending on how nice they're feeling. Few regulars down here, a couple provincials here, and they have 1 little regular in Halifax. However, I will just show you the counter tray. So there's like a piddly amount of little French guys you can bring on. There's a massive amount of British regulars and British aligned provincials that you can potentially bring out onto the board. And so this is the quintessential game of the British will, if they can play it well, become a juggernaut. They're quite slow. Some of their leaders are not very good, hard to move. They'll have a ton of very strong forces, and they will be this leviathan by the end of the game. And you, as the French, are trying to kind of dodge and avoid them, to pick off little forces here and there, and to conduct those raids. Raids are conducted by your irregular units. You're going to send a bunch of them down, and they're going to raid all of these different square spaces, which are referred to as, excuse me, as cultivated spaces. You can also raid a place that has a stockade in it. You can technically raid a fort, but like I don't know why you would, unless you were desperate. And you're going to pick up lots of victory points that way. Again, there's a lot of, with French and Indian war games, there's a lot of kind of chrome, so to speak, to make sure that certain things can or do happen. So, for example, the naval landings from Halifax to Louisbourg, this is one way. The French can't move out of here, they can get these troops out and go this way, but they can't land in Halifax to prevent this, for example. So you're either committing a lot to defend Louisbourg, to like hold on to everything, but then you have less troops out on the board because you're sticking a bunch in here. But then it forces the British to either kind of leave this and not have extra victory points, or to commit a lot to it as well. But most of your stuff is kind of already out, and so you have to kind of play the game. What I would tell you is you're going to play this the first couple times, and you'll make some hilarious mistakes. You will make horrendous blunders. Lots of people will die, and that's not the end of the world, because this is a game where experience is key. An experienced player will almost invariably always be an inexperienced one in this game, because there's so many little bits and pieces that you can like forget or overlook, and that's something that we might talk about some of those here today. But the French. Let's have a look at our kind of starting hand of cards. Again, we had a bunch of these British events, which we're just looking at the numbers. We really don't care what they say. We've got a bunch of these mixed events, which is fine. And then we have one of our own French events. And the French event, let's take a look at what it says. It says, provincial regiments dispersed for frontier duty. For each raided marker within the northern and southern departments, the French eliminates one unbesieged provincial unit belonging to that department. This is very good. So what this is saying is if we can go out and put a bunch of raid markers out, and then play this at the end of our turn, because we got, 7 or 8 cards we're going to play, then for each raid marker that's in the northern department, and these are not particularly, it's not my favorite delineation, but basically these yellow bordered ones are the southern department, and the ones that don't have a border is the northern department. So if I put 2 raid markers out, because I've sent my irregulars down and they've done some raiding, I'm going to eliminate 2 of these guys with this card. If I've also got some down here, I'm going to eliminate a couple of these provincials as well, as they get sent off to kind of protect the borders and not be a kind of a formed, drilled military unit. So that could be very, very strong as a play for us, but we have to set that up. The good thing is that raiding is something we want to be doing anyway, so that's great. So that kind of plays into our strategy. That's wonderful. Campaign is a card that you can activate any leader with. So this is one of those classic GMT games. The leaders have either 3, 2, or a 1 rating, and you have to have that number or higher on a card to activate them. So the 3 leaders are not very good, because only a few of your very expensive cards can activate them, and 1 leaders are typically much easier to activate. You can activate them with any card. Campaign, however, allows us to do any 2 leaders and any 2 forces. So you can do any 2 stacks on the board, and they can each do a full turn independent. That's really good. British colonial politics. This is going to slide this provincial assemblies track whichever way we want. With the French, we want to slide it down to reluctant. And what that's going to do is that's going to cap the amount of provincials that the British player can have, and the amount of things that they can do with that. A lot of their cards will require. I don't know if I have any here. No, but they have a bunch of cards that say play, or can't play if assemblies are at reluctant. Well, we're going to move it down to reluctant. Yeah, this is a strong card, but this really puts some handcuffs onto the British, which is really nice. Couple of these are little generic ones. Lake Schooner. It's going to stop people if they're moving along. Basically, you can stop people here and stop people moving in and around the lake because you have a boat kicking around, and it prevents movement. Fieldworks is a defensive card. You can tell these ones with the red banner are additional cards that you play. So an amphibious landing, a British player has to play an anchor card, and then they play the amphibious landing. Instead of doing regular naval move, they can move along these red paths to do these big attacks. So, and we hold a light infantry reinforcement for the British, which is nice. And Francois Bijot, French player, randomly discards a card. Great. So we don't have to worry about that happening to us. But basically, things that we're going to look at, we're going to try our best to kind of set up this, to play off of this, because this is really going to help us. But I think one of the first things that we might do is to look at... I might do this because early on, we kind of want to see what the British are going to do. So I think I would spend my first turn, I would move this down, and it says maximum 2 southern, which we have 2 southern provincials, and 6 northern provincials on the map. And they only have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So they don't, 6, sorry. They have 6, but what that means is that they can't levy any more. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Let's see if the British would have had any regulars, William Pitt, intercepted. So right here, perfect. This works as a great example. If the British have this card in their hand, may not be played if assembly is reluctant. They are reluctant. Within assembly track limits, which are now 2 and 6, they could place 4 northern or 2 southern. Well, those limits are hard capped, so they couldn't play any anyway. But even if they were at supportive and they were maxed out, you can't go above that limit anyway. But so that was really good. We kind of really hamstrung them on that. That was nice. So I might look to do that kind of a thing early, because what that does is then that puts the onus on the British. And the British are going to look at their hand and they might start placing out regulars. They might put a bunch of regulars into Halifax to build this up. Or they might just place a bunch down at one of these ports as they get off the boat. But it's nice to be able to see maybe what they're trying to do and where they're trying to commit early, if that's something that you have the capacity to do. After that, I might consider starting to activate my units. What I might start doing is something like an amphibious landing. We can't use an amphibious landing, so we're just going to use the little one-ops. And you have some options here. What I might do is I might pick up one of my one leaders, and he can bring along with him. So let's look at the little leader. He's got a 1 command value, so we can activate him with a 1 card. And he has a little superscript 2, which means he can bring along 2 units with him. And he has a 1, which gives him a +1 to his dice rolling. So we're going to bring 2 guys with me. And we'll leave these guys home. We're going to start going out to do some raiding. They have 6 movement. You have to stop in the mountains, which isn't my favorite thing in the whole world. So what we're going to do is we're going to go over this way, and we're going to go into Allegheny Central, and we're going to stop there. And we're going to do that because on a subsequent card, we're now going to activate this force, and we're going to start running in here to start raiding. And this is either going to force the British to kind of deal with it, or to just kind of suck it up and lose some victory points, basically. And so going early and trying to kind of press with your irregulars can be very, very, very strong. The problem is that we have to come up against some massive stacks, and we don't necessarily have the same level of forces to kind of deal with that. Because early on, these British are going to typically do one of 2 things. They're either going to march up this way and try to come up this route to get to Montreal, or they might split their forces, or commit very heavily, to go all the way up here to Oswego, and then start building to try and take out this stockade here and come up this way. It's very hard to move across mountains, so you're kind of limited, and you can see where the forts already start, of where you can and can't go. So we're going to be reactive based on what they do. If they're going to cut this way, that's a bit harder to kind of deal with, but we've got these forces we can move out. We could maybe start trying to build a fort over here to protect that. If they start coming up this way, very regularly, what you'll have to come across is start playing your little 2 cards to activate this stack of units in Quebec. And they can bring 6 guys. I would leave this guy. I'm not really that interested in him. So he can bring all these guys, and you're going to start waltzing him down this way to come and sit in this fort down here. Now the fort has a 4 in it. It's got a holding capacity of 4. 1, 2, 3. So we'll leave. We'll drop off a guy up there. Bring these guys here, and sit there. Now, if the British had moved out here, this is, they're going to start moving here, and then they're going to start having to spend a turn to build some stockades. And they might move here and build some stockades. You can trace supply up and down rivers, but you never, ever, ever, and cannot stress this enough, you never want to attack out of a space into wilderness where the space that you're attacking out of does not have a fort or a stockade. Because what will happen is if this big old stack of guys walks into this space and I choose to do a field battle instead of going into my fort, if I win and the British have to retreat, if you have to retreat to a space, which you have to retreat back where you came from, if you have drilled troops and you have to retreat back to a space that does not have a stockade or a fort, everyone dies. And that sounds harsh, but I have done it many a time. And sometimes you're like in a pinch and it's very risky and you kind of have to, but there's almost never a time where you should do that. It is so dangerous because you've got nowhere to get back, and they just pick you off on the way back, basically. So everyone dies. I have played games where I have killed all of my troops on the board, and then I'm like, oh, I have to concede because there's nothing left. So, what all of that to say is that the British player isn't just going to go, That's not going to happen. And if it does, he's now left himself very exposed. This is very, very risky, because if you haven't got there by that time, you can waltz this whole stack down and do a similar thing back to him, and again, if he has to retreat, everyone's dead. So this game has a pretty slow pace to it, and what I mean by that is that you're going to kind of move some guys and then build a stockade, and then you're going to move them again and build another stockade. You're not tearing across the whole map and doing blitzkriegs. You physically can't do that, or it's extremely risky to try. Because if you get intercepted and then you have to retreat, you're gone, and then the game's pretty much over at that point. So this game rewards being measured in what you're trying to do. So you have this big force. You can pretty much commit in one of two directions if you want to keep that big force together. What you might look at doing is splitting that force and having a defensive force over here that's pretty strong, and a defensive force that's okay, and maybe supporting it with some of these guys in Montreal. Because if you can hold here and you can hold here, and force the British to kind of whittle you down, or spend a long time and a lot of resources committing, you're going to be in a good spot. Because all the while you're kind of sitting pat, you're going to spend the rest of your cards messing with the British or doing raids. So let's say it comes back to us again. We're going to do some raids. Here, let me just activate. Here, I'll do a Lake Schooner, who cares? So we're going to activate these guys again, and you're going to move them down, and you're going to move them into here. Maybe we're going to go a little bit further because we have the movement to do so, which every space can only have one raid marker in it. And so, do the most furthest away ones you can, because it leaves the easy pickings for later on, is kind of how I feel about that. And when you do a raid, you say, I'm going to end my movement, and then you look at the little raid table, and you're going to roll on the raid table. So we're going against a cultivated space, which does not have a stockade, or a settlement like this. So what we're going to do is we are going to roll a die, and we're going to add to that our commander's tactics rating. If we had any rangers with us, which the British have some rangers and they're pretty nice, we would add that too. So we're just going to roll a die. I rolled a 3. We're going to add to that as a 4. And so we did not get a success, unfortunately, and we got a 1. And a 1 is tells us how many step losses that we have to take, which isn't great. So we're going to take a step loss. We're going to flip a guy over, and we didn't succeed, and then everyone goes home. So these guys are going to go back to their little orange spaces. So they're going to go home, basically. We have an Ottawa, and we have a Potawatomi. Boo. That's unfortunate. So they have to go all the way back to this box up here. So that wasn't great. If you had succeeded, what we're going to do is then we're going to place a raid marker out in that space. And the raid marker says half VP on it. That's rounded up, so we're guaranteed to get 1 VP out of that, basically. And then what we're going to do on subsequent turns is we're just going to... They went home, we're going to move them on right back out again. And so the French in this game are trying to raid. You have this big old stack of guys over here of irregulars. If you can get them... And it's slow going, and it's a commitment. If you can get them... That's one turn, you have to enter the mountains. And if you can get them down here, and you can start doing these raids, you're going to be in a really good spot. And how you can do this is if you have this stack, and you've spent a couple turns moving them down here, and the British haven't kind of reacted to that, to activate units individually and not as a stack, you play your card and you say, I'm going to activate units individually. To activate units individually, you're going to activate one drill unit or a number of leaders at a 1-to-1 basis, so you can activate 2 leaders, or you can activate your irregulars, and your irregulars cost half a point to activate. So 2 points will activate all 4 of these guys, and they're all going to move and all going to raid separately. So then you go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So you're going to move them all individually like that, and then you're going to resolve all of these raids. Now, these raids don't have the cool leader bonuses on them, because this guy's not very great. We'll bring him with us, though, just so that he can go back home. But now you're looking at, it's chance, but we're going to roll a bunch of times and see what happens. So let's go here. No, that's bad. So that's just no effect, and he's going to go home, and he's going to go home. Oh, he's a regular, so you can go back to the closest fort, I believe. This guy, oh, we got a success, so we're going to put out another raid marker. And we don't take any step losses, wonderful. We'll do another one here. A 2. 2 is no good, doesn't do anything. And the last one is a 2, is no good, doesn't do anything. So that's my terrible rolling. But these guys are all going to then go home, and I think they go back. They're going to go here. And he's Abenaki, this guy right here. And this guy's going to go back here as well. So all that to say is that you're going to spend a lot of your time raiding, or at least you should. Because this didn't get us an extra victory point, but now it sets us up to go and raid again. And we might get another one. If you had rolled well and you got a couple, great. When you look at your little leaders, these little 1-1 guys, they're designed to be leading raiding parties. That is what they're for, basically. So you're going to send them out with those leaders to go and raid. You're going to try and raid as much as humanly possible. The other thing that you're going to look to try to do is, eventually, there will come a time where, hopefully, you haven't lost your main field army in battle. Please try not to do that. I know that's difficult, but eventually, the British will be a juggernaut. They will come and get you. They're going to get some victory points here or there. They're going to do some attacks. You will have to fall back. But they're going to have sent guys out, and they're going to be threatening here, and they're going to be threatening here. But if they have big death stacks at both of these kind of endpoints of these routes, you can just waltz on down and start cutting all of this supply. You're going to pick up, we can't really do it with raiders, but if you've got a guy and a little leader, you can run down here, start flipping these stockades. You pick up a victory point for every one of those that you do. You can block the Mohawks so they stop being an ally. You can pick up another one of these right here. And all of a sudden, not only does that swing the victory points back to you, it cuts the supply. And you cannot, in this game, you cannot roll on the siege table unless you are in supply. So even if these guys make it all the way into Montreal and they're laying siege, they physically cannot roll on that siege table until they come back and deal with you. And if they've taken all their troops out here, they either have to come all the way back, hey, you're going to get all this land back, or they have to start ditching their cards and they're going to put out these British regulars with leaders. But guess what? Those are going to be all the way down here, and that's a very expensive card that gets removed from the game, and then they have to march them up, by which time you've futzed around, and then you've gone back home as well, and I'll never catch you. And so that's the kind of hit-and-run tactics that you're trying to look for as the French. Desperately trying to keep your Indian alliances as strong and as open as possible. Do we have any of those cards here where we can kind of show that? Probably. Not on hand. But basically, you only have a couple of French regular cards. You do not have many, but you're going for these Indian alliances. And when your irregular Indian units die, you are going to be putting these back out to put a bunch back out, or flip a bunch over and get them healed again so they can go back out raiding. And they can kind of take up another hit if you mess it up again. You want to be aware of Indians deserting. That is something that can be played on you. Very bad. And the other thing as the French that you want to be wary of is, if you can avoid it, having a death stack in this game means you're always susceptible to smallpox. And smallpox is especially bad for the French, because you're going to lose a die roll of units, of steps, and then you're going to remove all Indians. So if you have a big stack of Indian guys with some regulars, which I've often seen marching around with Montcalm, you will see it happen. That is like a no-brainer for the British, because they're going to flip half of the regulars and they're going to eliminate all of the Indians with them. And all of a sudden Montcalm is like, oh no, because they're one battle away from totally being wiped at that point. So that's one of the things you really, really have to watch out for. The gamble at Halifax and Louisbourg, you can either leave these guys here and just understand that at some point you're going to give up 3 victory points. But if you're being very good at being proactive and raiding, then good for you. Or if you happen to have the regulars card, you could try to match them toe-to-toe, because if they're attacking an even force against an even force, that's also a resource sink for the British as well. It's worth it for them in the long run, but I have won as the British without ever having taken Louisbourg. It can happen. If you commit all your forces everywhere and dominate the rest of the board, you can do it. But as the French, it's that case of using your regulars judiciously to hold areas, especially here and here, these little chokeholds, and then using all your other resources to try and raid as much as possible, to harry the supply lines, and play like the good French and Indian War player that you're going to be. The last thing that I'm going to talk about, and this is valid for both players, is you must remember that early season, totally fine. At the end of the late season, you have to be at your winter quarters, and you have to be within stacking limit, otherwise things will be very bad for you. So what does that look like? Each fort or stockade, they're at Crown Point, each fort or stockade can hold 4 units, basically. And each fortress has an unlimited number, and each of your natural home cultivated spaces also has an unlimited number of spaces, basically, of stacking limits. What's going to happen is if you're at a fort and you have 1, 2, 3, 4, if you've got more than 4 guys, regardless of what they are, but let's give them some of these just to be extra nasty. I'll stick these guys back here. So if you have more than 4 guys, and we're going to flip these guys over just so that we have a good example. So if you have more than 4 guys at the end of the late turn, what you're going to do is you are going to eliminate all of your reduced guys, and then you're going to flip all of your strong guys. So your big old stack now has a strength of 6. Whereas before, it had a strength of 12, 13, 14. That is a significant swing. And I have, as both sides in this game, killed all of my troops a number of times doing that. It is very easy to do that, especially as the British, if you're kind of stuck out here and you couldn't get into Quebec. So be very careful about that. But I have seen so many times where you have that 5th unit and you're trying to defend with a big strong army. That 5th unit will kill your whole army because you don't have enough food to go around for the summer months. Or the winter months, and everyone starves to death or is very weak at that point. So that is the only other thing, especially as the French, you do not have the resources to keep reinforcing. There's just not the cards in the game. There's just not the units in the game. You have to be extra careful about that. And it also is opportune to try to lure big stacks of British units out to then force them into those situations. Because if they can't split up because it's late in a turn, or if you can knock out a stockade so they've got nowhere to kind of go to when they got too many guys, you can do some real damage to them. That's free hits, that's free combats. They're just weaker, and you didn't have to necessarily engage in a field battle to do that. So that's the other real key thing to watch out for, because it's so easy for new players to fall foul of that. So hopefully that was at least marginally helpful. This is a game of moving and building stockades and forts as you go. You can't build 2 turns in a row, so it's like move, build, move, build, move, build, do something else, build. You will do a lot of that to build. That's why the game starts with these big rows of guys and rows of stockades, because it is so important, and that should be an indicator that you need to do that too and carry that on. And being measured in your approach, embracing the asymmetry as the French. You are the raid kings. You need to send out as many units as you can to raid, because you're also going to then force the British to then start building a bunch of stockades and keeping guys in the rear. Every time they're doing that, that's guys that aren't just charging up the fronts to come and kill you in Montreal. So that's a win for you in the long term as well. And that's basically how the French, generally speaking, function. There's obviously a lot of nuance to this game that you will get as you play it, but hopefully that was a decent enough primer of maybe some of the things to look to. Strategically, falling back is much better than losing a battle, especially one where there's lots of units involved that might get killed otherwise, because you do not have the resources, but you do have a very, very large upper hand in irregulars and raiding, and that is a large portion of where your victory points are going to come from. You're going to pick up some from doing some of this, but you're not going to be sieging any of this stuff. That's the reality of it. If you get to Albany and you could siege Albany because you've decimated the British, they're going to concede, because the game's over at that point. But you're never going to win by taking all the fortresses. It's just not going to happen. But that's hopefully helpful. So watch out for the British one of these that's coming up soon. But appreciate you very much for tuning in. I've been Alexander from theplayersaid.com.